So in terms of what you should be asking to people, right? It really boils down to like go all the way back to the start. Why are we doing these user interviews in the first place, right? Again, are you trying to validate a problem? Are you trying to validate a solution? Kind of what is that information that you need in order to make that product decision? And so generally speaking, kind of the four areas that I want to look for anytime I am doing a user interview is kind of these four areas. Part one, I really want to understand how does this, this person or these people currently live their lives, right? Kind of what are the different processes that they have around them? Kind of what's that context that they're in? And the reason why we want to understand that context is because ultimately, every product drives a behavioral change, right? Kind of the goal is not for people to use a product or buy a product. It's all about having a product change the behavior permanently for the better. Right? And so we need to understand then what is their current behavior. So first, part one is what are they doing today, right? Kind of how are they solving this problem today? What exactly are they doing? From there, we then want to understand from the user's eyes, what are their priorities, right? Kind of what are the pain points? What are the gaps, right? Because if you're just solving something that's, very, very minor annoyance or something that doesn't come up very frequently, that's probably not probably not a good investment of your time and your resources. Whereas if you find that, hey, users have this particularly deep pain that they keep running into, that is something that's really important that you want to learn about. From there, right, then we understand, who is this user? What are their challenges? Well, then let's think about, okay, well, how do we actually solve that, right? So we want to understand how do they think about kind of different competitors out there? What are the kinds of things that would make them switch to your solution, right? So, hey, if we had XYZ, right, kind of would that change the way that you're currently doing things? And then kind of the fourth component is more from a user like cost perspective or barriers. Well, what are the kinds of things that would make you not want to switch, right? Or like, hey, like why is it that you're still using your process today, right? So again, kind of summarizing, part one, we want to really understand the user context, right? So how are they living their lives? What is their current behavior? Part two is, understanding their mental model for decisions, right? So kind of what are the pains, what are the priorities? Part three is what are the benefits that I need to provide to this user for them to be able to switch? And then part four is what are the costs that users perceive that I need to be able to mitigate for them to be able to, convincingly switch. So as an example, if I want to be able to get someone onto, a new social media app, right? One of the costs there is, well, all of my friends are on a different social media app, right? So if I go over to that one, it's empty, it's not relevant, right? Then that's a cost. And we need to figure out, well, how would we mitigate that cost, right? So that's really how we think about kind of the four categories of interview questions. So yeah. A lot of times it's easier to first talk about like the things that we generally don't want to do with user interviews. I think that's a helpful starting point. And then we can compare that to, what are like, generally better kinds of interview questions. The thing that we don't want to do is we don't want our interview to, to pretend to be a survey, right? Kind of if it's something that, we could have surveyed someone for, we probably shouldn't have put in an interview, right? So we don't want to ask people a bunch of yes, no questions and have that kind of be like the end, right? So do you use a grocery shopping app? Yes, no, right? That's not really the way you want to think about it, right? A better way to phrase that question is, how do you currently shop for groceries today, right? So, so try to stay away from yes, no. Try to stay away from any sort of, pick list of, hey, these are the, here are like the three different options that you have, pick one of the three, right? So that's generally like not a great use of time. Another thing that's like not a great use of time is if you're just throwing people, all of these features at them and you're telling them like, would you use this? Would you not use this, etc. That's like not really the way to think about a user interview. Other things that you want to watch out for is you want to make sure that you are not biasing people. And so you don't want to purposely say something along the lines of, why is this thing so difficult? Or why is this so expensive, etc. Because then you make them think that the thing is more important than they personally naturally think. And you don't want to do it the other way either, right? Of like, oh, well, why is this not a problem? Like, well, it is a problem for me. So why are you saying it's not a problem, right? So those are kind of the things that you want to watch out for, right? Is like try not to be like yes, no, try not to have it be things that you could have just covered in a survey. Things that are really good in terms of interview questions is you want to ask them in a way that is open-ended, in a way that doesn't convey any sort of judgment, right? And so again, kind of going back to the grocery example, something that can be really helpful is, asking a question along the lines of, how do you currently plan meals for your household, right? And so then they talk through how they currently plan meals. And without saying that like, oh, that's good or oh, that's bad, etc. You're like, okay, well, tell me more. What are the kinds of challenges that you might run into, if there are any? What are the kinds of frictions that you're running into? What would you do to improve the way that you currently shop for groceries, right? Because these are all things that are very open-ended, that doesn't force an opinion on them. You also want to make sure that you're giving people the space to be able to give you a qualitative description, right? So ideally, your interview question should be set up in such a way that someone's going to give you, at least 1 to 2 minutes of like explaining themselves, right? Because again, if it were shorter, they probably could have answered it either in a survey or an email, right? And so like those are the kinds of ways in which I think about what makes a survey question, what makes a user interview set of questions good is whether people are able to dive into the context of the why behind who they see themselves as, kind of their identity, how they currently live their lives, so that behavior, and why they're using what they're using. And so kind of, again, that like mental model of how they make decisions and how they might switch to yours or not switch to yours. So that's really the way that I think about it.